ရားကြောင့်လည်းပါတယ်အတင်းအဓမ္မစစ်သားစုဆောင်းလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့လုံသားစွမ်းအား workforce တွေပြုံးတိရပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့ဆန္ဒတွေမယိုင်လဲပါဘူးအသက်ရှင်တန်ခြင်းကချွင်းချက်အပေါ်မိကြည့်ရတယ်ဆိုရင်ကြံနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့အနာဂတ်ကဘယ်မှာလဲမြန်မာပြည်ကလာတဲ့ဒုက္ခသည်တွေကပြဿနာအကျက်တဲ့ crisis ရဲ့အစမဟုတ်ပါဘူး crisis ရဲ့နောက်ဆက်တွဲအကျိုးဆက်ပါဒီလိုလူတွေအစုလိုက်ပြုံလိုက်ဆုံးခွာတာကိုရပ်တန့်ဖို့ဆိုရင်စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီကိုပံ့ပိုးကူညီကြပါရှေ့ဆက်ဖို့ကအဲ့တနည်းပဲရှိတယ်
လူအခွင့်အရေးတွေကိုတကယ်လေးစားတဲ့ဒဏ်ရာတွေကိုကုစားပေးတဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနဲ့တရားမျှတမှုရှိတဲ့အနာဂတ်ဖော်ဆောင်ရာမှာအမျိုးသမီးတွေဥဆောင်တဲ့နိုင်ငံမျိုးကျမတို့ရထိုက်ပါတယ်
အခုအချိန်နဲ့မတူတဲ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံသစ်ဆိုတာဖြစ်နိုင်ခြေရှိတဲ့အရာပါပြပုံတွေကယုံထပြီးတော့လူတိုင်းရဲ့အတန်တွေကိုတန်ဖိုးထားတဲ့အကြောက်တရားအတွက်နေရာမရှိတဲ့စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီနိုင်ငံတစ်ခုဖြစ်ပေါ့
လူငယ်တွေကပြောင်းလဲဆောင်ကျဉ်ပေးမဲ့လုံဆော်အားတွေဖြစ်တယ်သူတို့ဥဆောင်မှုကစီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုပုံစံတစ်ခုဖော်ဆောင်ပြီးအနာဂတ်တစ်ခုကိုအစပြုပြီးမှာပါဖိနှိပ်ညှဉ်းပန်းမှုအမြင့်တွယ်နေတဲ့ဒီစနစ်ကိုကျမတို့တိုက်ဖျက်ရပါမယ်ဒါကတယောက်နဲ့တယောက်တိုက်ဖျက်ဖို့မဟုတ်ပါဘူးမတရားမှုကိုတိုက်ဖျက်ဖို့ဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ကျွန်တော်ရဲ့တငယ်ချင်းတွေတေချေနှိမ့်ဆက်ခံရပျောက်ဆုံးသွားတာတွေရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့အနာဂတ်တည်းအတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဆက်လက်တိုက်ပွဲဝင်ကြအောင်ပါ
ကျွန်တော်တို့လိုချင်တာကလက်နဲ့အကြောင်းတရားနဲ့မဟုတ်ပဲလူတွေနဲ့တည်ဆောက်တဲ့ institution တွေပါ
လူနည်းစုလူမျိုးစုတွေရိုဟင်ဂျာတို့လိုလူနည်းစုအတင်းကထပ်ဆင့်လူနည်းစုတွေအပါအဝင်သူတို့ခွင့်ရေးတွေနဲ့လွတ်လပ်မှုတွေကိုတာလူညီမျှတပြေးညီခံစားကျင့်သုံးနိုင်မဲ့စီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုစနစ် governance system တရက်လိုအပ်ပါတယ်
ပဋိပက္ခအသက်ဆက်ဖို့မီးမွေးပေတဲ့ငွေကြေးဘဏ္ဍာတွေကိုဖျက်တောက်ကြပါစစ်ပွဲတွေချုပ်ငြိမ်းကြပါ
အနာဂတ်နိုင်ငံရေးစီးပွားရေးကဏ္ဍတွေမှာစစ်တပ်ရဲ့အခမ်းကဏ္ဍမရှိရပါဘူးမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလိုအပ်နေတာကအယက်တောက်အုပ်ချုပ်မှုအောက်မှာရှိတဲ့စစ်တပ်တစ်ပြက်ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ပညာရေးကစွမ်းအားပါပညာရေးနဲ့အသည့်တွေဖွင့်ဖို့စွမ်းရည်မြင့်ပေးဖို့စီးလုံးညီညွတ်ကြဖို့အကြောက်တရားကွင်းဆက်တွေဖျက်တောက်ဖြစ်ဖို့ပြီးတော့ပညာရေးကိုအားလုံးလက်လန်းမိနိုင်အောင်လုပ်ဖို့လိုတယ်
စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဖွံ့ဖြိုးတိုးတက်မှုဆိုတာလမ်းတွေကျောင်းတွေတိုးတက်တာကြီးပဲမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောင်းတရားချုပ်ငြိမ်းတာမိသားစုဘဝတွေစုပြေစေတာလူမှုအတိုင်းအဝိုင်းအတိုင်းအဝန်တစ်ခုစီချင်းရှင်တန်တိုးတက်စေတာတွေလည်းပါပါတယ်
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလက်နက်ကင်ပြည်ပခါကအရာအလုံးကိုဖျက်ဆီးလိုက်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့နိုင်ငံပြည်내တည်ဆောက်ရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေနဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီအသွင်ကူးပြောင်းရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေအတွက်နိုင်ငံတကာအတိုင်းအဝန်နဲ့အာရှဒေသတွင်းနိုင်ငံတွေရဲ့ကူညီထောက်ပံ့မှုတွေလိုအပ်ပါတယ်အရင်တစ်ခါအမျိုးသားပြည်내တည်မြဲရေးကာလတုန်းကတရားမျှတမှုတွေမြင်မြုပ်ခံရတာကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဘာမှမပြောနိုင်ပဲလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ပြီးပါပြီအခုတော့အဲ့ဒီဇညွန်းတွေကိုမီးရှို့ပစ်လိုက်ပါပြီအပြောင်းလဲကလွှဲရင်တပြားမှအရှော့မပေးနိုင်ဘူး
ရင်ကငြိမ်ခံလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြီးဆက်ခဲ့ရတာအပစ်ပေးရေးယူမှုကကင်းလွတ်တာတွေအတင်ရဲလာတာတွေဂျန်နာကိစ္စတွေကြောင်ထိုးခံရတာတွေကိုအရင်တစ်ခေါက်အမျိုးသားပြန်လဲတည်မြဲရေးလုပ်ငန်းစဉ်တုန်းကလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ရတာအခုတော့အစဉ်ပြေရင်ပြီးရောဆိုပြီးလုပ်လို့မရတော့ဘူးကိုယ့်အနေရဲ့အတွက်လည်းသတိရမှာပဲဘာလို့လဲဆိုတော့တမိုင်းတစ်ပတ်ပြန်လဲမှာကိုလက်မခံကျင်တော့လို့ပါအပြောင်းလဲဆိုတာမျှော်လင့်ချက်မဟုတ်ဘူးတာဝန်တရက်ပါ
တိုင်းပြည်ရဲ့စီးပွားရေးကသွေးလိမ့်လိမ့်ပါအလုပ်ကိုင်းတွေပျောက်ဆုံးစီးပွားရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေပြိုပြက်စစ်တမ်းကြောင့်လည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောက်တရားကြောင့်လည်းပါတယ်အတင်းအဓမ္မစစ်သားစုဆောင်းလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့လုံသားစွမ်းအား workforce တွေပြုံးတိရပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့ဆန္ဒတွေမယိုင်လဲပါဘူးအသက်ရှင်တန်ခြင်းကချွင်းချက်အပေါ်မိကြည့်ရတယ်ဆိုရင်ကြံနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့အနာဂတ်ကဘယ်မှာလဲမြန်မာပြည်ကလာတဲ့ဒုက္ခသည်တွေကပြဿနာအကျက်တဲ့ crisis ရဲ့အစမဟုတ်ပါဘူး crisis ရဲ့နောက်ဆက်တွဲအကျိုးဆက်ပါဒီလိုလူတွေအစုလိုက်ပြုံလိုက်ဆုံးခွာတာကိုရပ်တန့်ဖို့ဆိုရင်စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီကိုပ ပံ့ပိုးကူညီကြပါရှေ့ဆက်ဖို့ကအဲ့တနည်းပဲရှိတယ်
လူအခွင့်အရေးတွေကိုတကယ်လေးစားတဲ့ဒဏ်ရာတွေကိုကုစားပေးတဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနှင့်တရားမျှတမှုရှိတဲ့အနာဂတ်ဖော်ဆောင်ရာမှာအမျိုးသမီးတွေဥဆောင်တဲ့နိုင်ငံမျိုးကျွန်မတို့ရထိုက်ပါတယ်
အခုအချိန်နဲ့မတူတဲ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံသစ်ဆိုတာဖြစ်နိုင်ခြေရှိတဲ့အရာပါပြပုံတွေကယုံထပြီးတော့လူတိုင်းရဲ့အတန်တွေကိုတန်ဖိုးထားတဲ့အကြောက်တရားအတွက်နေရာမရှိတဲ့စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီနိုင်ငံတစ်ခုဖြစ်ပေါ့
လူငယ်တွေကပြောင်းလဲဆောင်ကျဉ်ပေးမဲ့လုံဆော်အားတွေဖြစ်တယ်သူတို့ဥဆောင်မှုကစီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုပုံစံတစ်ခုဖော်ဆောင်ပြီးအနာဂတ်တစ်ခုကိုအစပြုပြီးမှာပါဖိနှိပ်ညှဉ်းပန်းမှုအမြင့်တွယ်နေတဲ့ဒီစနစ်ကိုကျမတို့တိုက်ဖျက်ရပါမယ်ဒါကတယောက်နဲ့တယောက်တပ်ဖြတ်ဖို့မဟုတ်ပါဘူးမတရားမှုကိုတိုက်ဖျက်ဖို့ဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ကျွန်တော်ရဲ့တငယ်ချင်းတွေတေချေနှိမ့်ဆက်ခံရပျောက်ဆုံးသွားတာတွေရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့အနာဂတ်တည်းအတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဆက်လက်တိုက်ပွဲဝင်ကြအောင်ပါ
ကျွန်တော်တို့လိုချင်တာကလက်နဲ့အကြောင်းတရားနဲ့မဟုတ်ပဲလူတွေနဲ့တည်ဆောက်တဲ့ institution တွေပါ
လူနည်းစုလူမျိုးစုတွေရိုဟင်ဂျာတို့လိုလူနည်းစုအတင်းကထပ်ဆင့်လူနည်းစုတွေပါဝင်သူတို့ခွင့်ရေးတွေနဲ့လွတ်လပ်မှုတွေကိုတာလူညီမျှတပြေးညီခံစားကျင့်သုံးနိုင်မဲ့စီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုစနစ် governance system တရက်လိုအပ်ပါတယ်
ပဋိပက္ခအသက်ဆက်ဖို့မီးမွေးပေတဲ့ငွေကြေးဘဏ္ဍာတွေကိုဖျက်တောက်ကြပါစစ်ပွဲတွေချုပ်ငြိမ်းကြပါ
အနာဂတ်နိုင်ငံရေးစီးပွားရေးကဏ္ဍတွေမှာစစ်တပ်ရဲ့အခမ်းကဏ္ဍမရှိရပါဘူးမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလိုအပ်နေတာကအယက်တောက်အုပ်ချုပ်မှုအောက်မှာရှိတဲ့စစ်တပ်တစ်ပြက်ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ပညာရေးကစွမ်းအားပါပညာရေးနဲ့အသည့်တွေဖွင့်ဖို့စွမ်းရည်မြင့်ပေးဖို့စီးလုံးညီညွတ်ကြဖို့အကြောက်တရားကွင်းဆက်တွေဖျက်တောက်ဖြစ်ဖို့ပြီးတော့ပညာရေးကိုအားလုံးလက်လန်းမိနိုင်အောင်လုပ်ဖို့လိုတယ်
စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဖွံ့ဖြိုးတိုးတက်မှုဆိုတာလမ်းတွေကျောင်းတွေတိုးတက်တာကြီးပဲမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောင်းတရားချုပ်ငြိမ်းတာမိသားစုဘဝတွေစုပြေစေတာလူမှုအတိုင်းအဝိုင်းအတိုင်းအဝန်တစ်ခုစီချင်းရှင်တန်တိုးတက်စေတာတွေလည်းပါပါတယ်
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလက်နက်ကင်ပြည်ပခါကအရာအလုံးကိုဖျက်ဆီးလိုက်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့နိုင်ငံပြည်내တည်ဆောက်ရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေနဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီအသွင်ကူးပြောင်းရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေအတွက်နိုင်ငံတကာအတိုင်းအဝန်နဲ့အာရှဒေသတွင်းနိုင်ငံတွေရဲ့ကူညီထောက်ပံ့မှုတွေလိုအပ်ပါတယ်အရင်တစ်ခါအမျိုးသားပြည်내တည်မြဲရေးကာလတုန်းကတရားမျှတမှုတွေမြင်မြုပ်ခံရတာကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဘာမှမပြောနိုင်ပဲလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ပြီးပါပြီအခုတော့အဲ့ဒီဇညွန်းတွေကိုမီးရှို့ပစ်လိုက်ပါပြီအပြောင်းလဲကလွှဲရင်တပြားမှအရှောက်မပေးနိုင်ဘူး
ရင်ကငြိမ်ခံလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြီးဆက်ခဲ့ရတာအပစ်ပေးရေးယူမှုကကင်းလွတ်တာတွေအတင်ရဲလာတာတွေဂျန်နာကိစ္စတွေကြောင်ထိုးခံရတာတွေကိုအရင်တစ်ခေါက်အမျိုးသားပြန်လဲတည်မြဲရေးလုပ်ငန်းစဉ်တုန်းကလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ရတာအခုတော့အစဉ်ပြေရင်ပြီးရောဆိုပြီးလုပ်လို့မရတော့ဘူးကိုယ့်အနေရဲ့အတွက်လည်းသတိရမှာပဲဘာလို့လဲဆိုတော့တမိုင်းတစ်ပတ်ပြန်လဲမှာကိုလက်မခံကျင်တော့လို့ပါအပြောင်းလဲဆိုတာမျှော်လင့်ချက်မဟုတ်ဘူးတာဝန်တရက်ပါ
တိုင်းပြည်ရဲ့စီးပွားရေးကသွေးလိမ့်လိမ့်ပါအလုပ်ကိုင်တွေပျောက်ဆုံးစီးပွားရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေပြိုပြက်စစ်တမ်းကြောင့်လည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောက်တရားကြောင့်လည်းပါတယ်အတင်းအဓမ္မစစ်သားစုဆောင်းလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့လုံသားစွမ်းအား workforce တွေပြုံးတိရပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့ဆန္ဒတွေမယိုင်လဲပါဘူးအသက်ရှင်တန်ခြင်းကချွင်းချက်အပေါ်မိကြည့်ရတယ်ဆိုရင်ကြံနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့အနာဂတ်ကဘယ်မှာလဲမြန်မာပြည်ကလာတဲ့ဒုက္ခသည်တွေကပြဿနာအကျက်တဲ့ crisis ရဲ့အစမဟုတ်ပါဘူး crisis ရဲ့နောက်ဆက်တွဲအကျိုးဆက်ပါဒီလိုလူတွေအစုလိုက်ပြုံလိုက်ဆုံးခွာတာကိုရပ်တန့်ဖို့ဆိုရင်စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီကိုပံ့ပိုးကူညီကြပါရှေ့ဆက်ဖို့ကအဲ့တနည်းပဲရှိတယ်
လူအခွင့်အရေးတွေကိုတကယ်လေးစားတဲ့ဒဏ်ရာတွေကိုကုစားပေးတဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနှင့်တရားမျှတမှုရှိတဲ့အနာဂတ်ဖော်ဆောင်ရာမှာအမျိုးသမီးတွေဥဆောင်တဲ့နိုင်ငံမျိုးကျွန်မတို့ရထိုက်ပါတယ်
အခုအချိန်နဲ့မတူတဲ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံသစ်ဆိုတာဖြစ်နိုင်ခြေရှိတဲ့အရာပါပြပုံတွေကယုံထပြီးတော့လူတိုင်းရဲ့အတန်တွေကိုတန်ဖိုးထားတဲ့အ ကြောက်တရားအတွက်နေရာမရှိတဲ့စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီနိုင်ငံတစ်ခုဖြစ်ပေါ့
လူငယ်တွေကပြောင်းလဲဆောင်ကျဉ်ပေးမဲ့လုံဆော်အားတွေဖြစ်တယ်သူတို့ဥဆောင်မှုကစီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုပုံစံတစ်ခုဖော်ဆောင်ပြီးအနာဂတ်တစ်ခုကိုအစပြုပြီးမှာပါဖိနှိပ်ညှဉ်းပန်းမှုအမြင့်တွယ်နေတဲ့ဒီစနစ်ကိုကျမတို့တိုက်ဖျက်ရပါမယ်ဒါကတယောက်နဲ့တယောက်တပ်ဖြတ်ဖို့မဟုတ်ပါဘူးမတရားမှုကိုတိုက်ဖျက်ဖို့ဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ကျွန်တော်ရဲ့တငယ်ချင်းတွေတေချေနှိမ့်ဆက်ခံရပျောက်ဆုံးသွားတာတွေရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့အနာဂတ်တည်းအတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဆက်လက်တိုက်ပွဲဝင်ကြအောင်ပါ
ကျွန်တော်တို့လိုချင်တာကလက်နဲ့အကြောင်းတရားနဲ့မဟုတ်ပဲလူတွေနဲ့တည်ဆောက်တဲ့ institution တွေပါ
လူနည်းစုလူမျိုးစုတွေရိုဟင်ဂျာတို့လိုလူနည်းစုအတင်းကထပ်ဆင့်လူနည်းစုတွေပါဝင်သူတို့ခွင့်ရေးတွေနဲ့လွတ်လပ်မှုတွေကိုတာတူညီမျှတပြေးညီခံစားကျင့်သုံးနိုင်မဲ့စီမံအုပ်ချုပ်မှုစနစ် governance system တရက်လိုအပ်ပါတယ်
ပဋိပက္ခအသက်ဆက်ဖို့မီးမွေးပေတဲ့ငွေကြေးဘဏ္ဍာတွေကိုဖျက်တောက်ကြပါစစ်ပွဲတွေချုပ်ငြိမ်းကြပါ
အနာဂတ်နိုင်ငံရေးစီးပွားရေးကဏ္ဍတွေမှာစစ်တပ်ရဲ့အခမ်းကဏ္ဍမရှိရပါဘူးမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလိုအပ်နေတာကအယက်တောက်ချုပ်မှုအောက်မှာရှိတဲ့စစ်တပ်တစ်ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ပညာရေးကစွမ်းအားပါပညာရေးနဲ့အသည့်တွေဖွင့်ဖို့စွမ်းရည်မြင့်ပေးဖို့စီးလုံးညီညွတ်ကြဖို့အကြောက်တရားကွင်းဆက်တွေဖျက်တောက်ဖြစ်ဖို့ပြီးတော့ပညာရေးကိုအားလုံးလက်လန်းမိနိုင်အောင်လုပ်ဖို့လိုတယ်
စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဖွံ့ဖြိုးတိုးတက်မှုဆိုတာလမ်းတွေကျောင်းတွေတိုးတက်တာကြီးပဲမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောင်းတရားချုပ်ငြိမ်းတာမိသားစုဘဝတွေစုပြေစေတာလူမှုအတိုင်းအဝိုင်းအတိုင်းအဝန်တစ်ခုစီချင်းရှင်တန်တိုးတက်စေတာတွေလည်းပါပါတယ်
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာလက်နက်ကင်ပြည်ပခါကအရာအလုံးကိုဖျက်ဆီးလိုက်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့နိုင်ငံပြည်내တည်ဆောက်ရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေနဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီအသွင်ကူးပြောင်းရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေအတွက်နိုင်ငံတကာအတိုင်းအဝန်နဲ့အာရှဒေသတွင်းနိုင်ငံတွေရဲ့ကူညီထောက်ပံ့မှုတွေလိုအပ်ပါတယ်အရင်တစ်ခါအမျိုးသားပြည်내တည်မြဲရေးကာလတုန်းကတရားမျှတမှုတွေမြင်မြုပ်ခံရတာကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဘာမှမပြောနိုင်ပဲလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ပြီးပါပြီအခုတော့အဲ့ဒီဇညွန်းတွေကိုမီးရှို့ပစ်လိုက်ပါပြီအပြောင်းလဲကလွှဲရင်တပြားမှအရှောက်မပေးနိုင်ဘူး
ရင်ကငြိမ်ခံလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပေးဆက်ခဲ့ရတာအပစ်ပေးရေးယူမှုကကင်းလွတ်တာတွေအတင်ရဲလာတာတွေဂျန်နာကိစ္စတွေကြောင်ထိုးခံရတာတွေကိုရင်တစ်ခေါက်အမျိုးသားပြန်လဲတည်မြဲရေးလုပ်ငန်းစဉ်တုန်းကလက်ပိုက်ကြည့်နေခဲ့ရတာအခုတော့အစဉ်ပြေရင်ပြီးရောဆိုပြီးလုပ်လို့မရတော့ဘူးကိုယ့်အနေရဲ့အတွက်လည်းသတိရမှာပဲဘာလို့လဲဆိုတော့တမိုင်းတစ်ပတ်ပြန်လဲမှာကိုလက်မခံကျင်တော့လို့ပါပြောင်းလဲဆိုတာမျှော်လင့်ချက်မဟုတ်ဘူးတာဝန်တရက်
တိုင်းပြည်ရဲ့စီးပွားရေးကတွေးလိမ့်လိမ့်ပါအလုပ်ကိုင်းတွေပျောက်ဆုံးစီးပွားရေးလုပ်ငန်းတွေပြိုပြက်စစ်တမ်းကြောင့်လည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးအကြောက်တရားကြောင့်လည်းပါတယ်အတင်းအဓမ္မစစ်သားစုဆောင်းလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့လုံသားစွမ်းအား workforce တွေပြုံးတိရပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့ဆန္ဒတွေမယိုင်လဲပါဘူးအသက်ရှင်တန်ခြင်းကချွင်းချက်အပေါ်မိကြည့်ရတယ်ဆိုရင်ကြံနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့တွေရဲ့အနာဂတ်ကဘယ်မှာလဲမြန်မာပြည်ကလာတဲ့ဒုက္ခသည်တွေကပြဿနာအကျက်တဲ့ crisis ရဲ့အစမဟုတ်ပါဘူး crisis ရဲ့နောက်ဆက်တွဲအကျိုးဆက်ပါဒီလိုလူတွေအစုလိုက်ပြုံလိုက်ဆုံးခွာတာကိုရပ်ထားလို့ဆိုရင်စစ်မှန်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီကိုဖန်တီးနိုင်ကြပါရှေ့ဆက်ဖို့ကအဲ့ဒီနည်း
It works. Okay. Hello. I don't think it does. Yeah. Okay. Now it does. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Hello. We'll have some. Yeah, it works. Hello. It just. Please, could you just take your seats? We're going to start. Hello. Great. Very good. We have. We'll have. We have to start now. Thank you very much. While we do that, there's a couple of things that we wanted to mention to you before we begin. And it's to remind you that this event will be recorded and live streamed. If you have any privacy concerns or would like not to show your identity for any reason, we have some face masks at the entrance. Please just go and take one of them. With that said, I welcome you back to your seats. Perfect, very well-behaved crowd. My name is Edgar Rodriguez. I'm representing the International Development Research Center of Canada. I lead the Knowledge for Democracy Myanmar initiative, which is a partnership that Global Affairs Canada and Canada's IDRC, International Development Research Center, has on Myanmar. We have a team in different locations, in our headquarters in Ottawa and in our Asia regional office in Delhi. And we also have a number of team members now in Chiang Mai, Chantal Brownwalder and Kasmita Basing. They are located there now. And here in Bangkok, we are working with a part of our team, Maggie Polkar and her team, Mia, around. So thank you very much. The event would not have been able, we would not have been able to put it together without their help. Thank you very much to the FCC team as well. Now, this initiative, the K4DM, or the Knowledge for Democracy Myanmar, it's almost turning a decade. And the initiative has worked to strengthen higher education and research in Myanmar, engaging youth, women, and ethnic minorities, so that they can build their own understanding of public policy and lead conversations within their institutions, civil society, and policy-making spaces. At the heart of this work is the belief that when you invest in youth, and you are investing really in catalysts for change. Their leadership, their youth leadership, will help reshape governance in Myanmar and ignite what we believe to be a brighter and more inclusive future for the country. To begin the evening, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Jason Talk. He's coming from the Canadian Embassy in Yangon, where he has been leading the development work as the head of cooperation. Jason, please.
Minglaba, I'm really happy to join the launch of the Human Rights Report here in Bangkok and to continue Canada's support to IDRC. And I'm looking forward to the ensuing panel discussion. Our thoughts continue to be with the people of Myanmar following the devastating earthquake in March, which exacerbated the suffering of people already facing a dire humanitarian crisis. We are deeply concerned by the military regime continuing to redirect aid, restrict humanitarian access, and break ceasefire commitments following the earthquake, including attacks on civilian populated areas and earthquake-affected regions. Canada will continue to support the people of Myanmar, including the Rohingya, that are facing egregious international human rights and humanitarian law violations in a context of worsening and widespread armed conflict. This includes the provision of international assistance and supporting at-risk crisis-affected populations in Myanmar, including women, girls, and ethnic minorities. Canada continues to work to address accountability for perpetrators of human rights violations in Myanmar and justice for survivors. We do this through sanctions, calls for the UN Security Council to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court, support for the independent mechanism for Myanmar, and the joint declaration of intervention filed with Denmark, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and the UK in the case brought by the Gambia against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice, alleging violations of the Genocide Convention. Canada will continue to work with the international community to respond to actions that constitute a grave breach of international peace and security, and to promote accountability for serious human rights and humanitarian law violations, and seek justice for survivors. Canada urges all countries to halt and prevent all operational support and to cease the direct and indirect supply, sale, or transfer of all weapons, munitions, military equipment and materials, dual-use equipment, and technical assistance to the Myanmar Armed and Security Forces and their representatives. Canada has already done so, and we strongly encourage concentrated international action in this regard. To conclude with a personal reflection as I near the end of my assignment in Yangon, it has been a privilege to support and work with human rights defenders, independent media, citizen journalists, scholars, women's rights organizations, youth groups, and civil society. I am both awed and inspired by your energy and resilience. And I know these are difficult times, but I urge you to continue to work together to build a peaceful, inclusive, and democratic country that the people of Myanmar deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. These are kind words, and that will be that will mark the contributions that Canada continues and will continue to in Myanmar. For tonight, we are proud to bring together a very insightful and passionate group of panelists to discuss a topic that could not be more urgent for Myanmar today, which is the situation of human rights. We'll be reflecting on the latest report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, which was presented just last week at the 59th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. The report is grounded in evidence provided by hundreds of Burmese individuals, some of whom were directly connected to our initiative. As the report clearly states, development isn't just roads or schools, it's ending fear, it's feeding families, and it's letting communities thrive. That's a message that we take to heart in our initiative, and as you heard, also in Canada as a whole. We're deeply grateful to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which has also become the host and partner of this initiative for this summer, taking 2 of our fellows. So we are grateful for that gesture. We're honored that the office has been able to share, or will be able to share, the highlights of the report tonight. And I want to really sincerely thank you, James, and your office. Let me also take a moment to thank the panelists, but they will be really introduced by our moderator. So thank you very much for all bringing a part of K4DM beliefs into the conversation. They having different roles with initiative. So the person I would like to introduce, and that I'm very proud of doing so, is Napa Steyn. Napa Steyn is going to moderate the panel, and he represents the next generation of Burmese Canadian leadership that we have been talking about in this initiative. He is a research fellow with the Myanmar Policy and Community Knowledge, or MyPAC hub, which sits at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, where he has recently completed a master's in public policy. NAPAS has supported the Myanmar diaspora organizing, and he has developed educational tools to raise awareness of the crisis in Myanmar. And he's briefed policymakers and parliamentarians in Canada and elsewhere as well, as he will probably tell us a little bit more during the night. More recently, he has completed a fellowship in Chiang Mai University through the UBC Myanmar Initiative project that is part of our initiative. With that, I now leave the floor to Napas to continue with the introduction and moderation of the panel. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Napas.
Thank you very much, Edgar, for that very generous introduction. So we're here tonight to reflect on the latest report from the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on the situation in Myanmar. The report is grounded in testimonies from hundreds of Burmese individuals, including people connected to this initiative. It offers not just an account of the violations, but a clear timeline and series of recommendations for the international community, on-the-ground actors, and neighbors. To help us unpack the findings and their implications, we're joined by 4 individuals with deep experience across law, civil society, and resistance. First, we'll hear a brief overview of the report from James Rodehaver, who leads the Myanmar team at the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. James has worked on human rights in conflict and post-conflict settings for more than 2 decades, including in Syria, Afghanistan, and the Balkans. After that, each of our panelists will offer their reflections, and I will introduce them now. First, we have Thinzar Shinle Yi, a democracy and women's rights activist and director of Sisters to Sisters, and she has been on the front lines of Myanmar's resistance movement and continues to advocate from Thailand. Toby Mendel, executive director of the Center for Law and Democracy, is a global expert on media freedom, digital rights, and access to information. And Dr. Mimi Winberg, Senior Adjunct Fellow at the East-West Center, who brings expertise in Myanmar's civil-military relations and regional security dynamics. Each speaker will have approximately 3 to 4 minutes to respond to James's report, which will be around 8 to 10 minutes, depending. After this, we'll open the floor to questions and dialogue. With that, please welcome James Rodehaver to begin the panel.
Thank you all very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's even more of a pleasure to share the stage with such a panel. Anytime I can sit with civil society leaders and champions, it refreshes my energy. So if nothing else, I promise I won't put you to sleep this evening. What I will try to do, though, is just reflect a bit on this report that we've just put out. As was just said, this report was just presented to the UN Human Rights Council a little over a week ago by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This was the 15th time the High Commissioner has updated the Human Rights Council on the crisis in Myanmar since the coup began, and it is the 14th public report that my team has put out into the ether. And it was an unusual kind of report for us, because this report was not necessarily about recounting the current human rights situation and the violations that really are emblematic of the crisis, but it was more of a reflection on the aspirations of the Myanmar people for a better future. And many people have come to me and said, why this report and why now? And if I were to be facetious, I would say it's because the member states asked us to do this report. But in actual fact, the reason why we did it is because after 4.5 years, one of the, I'd say, the key features of this crisis has been the character and scope of the resistance of the Myanmar people to the military's seizure of power and the violations and violence it has wrought throughout the country. And what that has really meant to us is there needs to be more attempts to listen to why the Myanmar people are resisting, why their resistance has taken the character it has, and most importantly, what do they want out of their own future? What do they want their resistance to mean? And yet, too often, the Myanmar people's voices are the last voices that anyone seems to want to listen to. And so this report is at least what we thought was a chance to really try to magnify those voices. But first we had to listen. And so one of the things that we have done is we did conduct consultations, over 120 consultations, both online and in person, with people from Myanmar, both people from inside Myanmar. The vast majority of our consultations were with people from all walks of life, from all ethnicities, all regions and states of the country, who were inside the country. And then we had a number of people from the diaspora, from countries all around the region, and we conducted these consultations around certain thematic areas to find out what they wanted to see in their future. What were their aspirations? What are they working towards? And so the report is the result of those consultations. And if I were to say, what is the sort of the key finding, or what's the overall theme that came out of these consultations, I would say the headline would be, the Myanmar military must play no role in public life moving forward. People yearn for a peaceful, inclusive, and democratic society grounded in accountability and human rights. Now, in the report, of course, it's hard to avoid talking about the calculus of brutality, the numbers that make up or characterize this crisis. And I will just recount some of those numbers because it really makes even more remarkable the resistance that people have shown at every level of society. It's useful to remember that nearly 7,000 people at a minimum have been killed by the Myanmar military since the coup began. More than 29,000 people have been detained for their political dissent. Less than half of those have ever seen a date in court. And even then, there has not been a single moment in the courts that has met anything resembling fair trial standards or due process. Across the country, the humanitarian consequences of this crisis has been devastating. More than 3.5 million people displaced. More than 22 or nearly 22 million people have been assessed as in acute humanitarian need. An estimated 1.3 million people have fled the country and crossed international borders seeking protection. Over 15 million people are living in acute food insecurity. Over 45 million people in Myanmar right now, or 4 out of every 5, subsist just above or below the poverty line as a result of this crisis. Yet the military is not prioritizing economic stimulus. They're not prioritizing the distribution of aid or assistance, the offering of public services. Part of that is because they can't. The civil service has shown itself to be dysfunctional and broken because most civil servants left to resist the violence. But what is a more damning statistic or figure is that over 60% of the public budget has been redirected to military expenditure in this time of acute humanitarian crisis. So, if you take all of that into account, you think, okay, then what has happened as a result of this resistance? And what our consultations consistently showed were that you had a number of ways in which what we called constituencies for change had developed. Throughout all the misery, the people of Myanmar had demonstrated remarkable courage and resilience, meeting violence with resistance to meet the needs of their fellow citizens at a local level. We examined some of these key constituencies that has served as engines for change and resiliency within the civilian population. We noted core groups such as human rights defenders and media workers who continue to shed light on violations despite, of course, the tremendous obstacles, particularly security obstacles that they face. Religious institutions, civil society, and community-based groups, to say nothing of the democracy movement and its institutions, are working to provide health and education assistance in the absence of a functional state or essential social and public services. In protest against military rule, civil servants resigned en masse from public office and are helping to establish alternative governance mechanisms. Women, in particular, are at the forefront of pro-democracy campaigns and supporting families of political prisoners. They are fighting to dismantle the patriarchal systems of the country and demanding representation in emerging institutions. Young people, the youth of the country, are also involved in their country's political future, helping to establish local governance structures and humanitarian networks and advocating for environmental protection. So these different groups, of course, members of people cross the line. Some are members of multiple groups for change, but in the end, it's interesting to see how closely each one of these groups people affiliate themselves with. And of course, that's a very different picture from what you would look at and say were the engines for change or the engines for governance in Myanmar before the coup. And it gives, I think, a real bright spot for the future of the country. So, drawing on the views of these different groups, they set out really 4 different pathways to support their aspirations. First, Pursuing accountability and justice will be crucial to the peaceful and inclusive and democratic future of Myanmar. Myanmar's present crisis is rooted in grave violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, killings, abductions, torture, arbitrary detention that have largely gone unpunished for decades. This is not just a question of the last 4.5 years. This is, of course, something that's been endemic for a very long time. These are not the excesses of a few bad apples or poor leadership. They are the very strategic choices that have been made by a military apparatus that has often chosen to prey on its own people rather than to resolve issues through dialogue, compromise, or democratic means. Freeing all political prisoners and bringing all perpetrators of human rights violations to justice are key to the future of the country, particularly for reconciliation to move forward and for a transitional justice process to take root. Ongoing proceedings at national and international levels are crucial steps towards accountability. There are many lessons to be gleaned from transitional justice mechanisms, and people we consulted with, what was extremely heartening were so many people were aware of good practice and examples from other countries, and they wanted to see such mechanisms applied to Myanmar, whether it be truth-telling or truth-seeking processes, or what particularly resonated with us was lustration or vetting of the future civil service of the country. And I would say, in particular, the judiciary. As I mentioned before, the judiciary has been an engine through which so many violations have taken place. Many of the people we spoke to were adamant that these judges should not be judges any longer in the future democratic Myanmar. Second, the pathways that were discussed were on the good governance and civic space. People told my team of their wish for a civilian-led democratic society with representative and transparent local institutions. These structures need full respect for diversity, equality, and human rights. Naturally, they stressed as a key entry point to such a system the need for free and fair elections. This is a point that they stressed repeatedly. This was even before the specter of a possible forced elections process in December really became more of a reality, or at least a possibility. It is also crucial to ensure constitutional and institutional reforms. People were very clear about clearing out entities that have reinforced the military rather than oppose or check its excesses. Foremost among these is, of course, the judiciary, as I mentioned, as well as repealing laws that have reinforced discrimination based on race, religion, and sex. This, of course, will be crucial to ensuring broader and more equitable participation in society. This would also be an important step forward to ensure the rights of minorities, especially the Rohingya. Promoting and protecting a vibrant civic space, including free and independent media, will be central to holding all of those in power to account moving forward. These are points that were stressed repeatedly. Thirdly, the economy must serve the people of the country. For decades, the military has exploited Myanmar's economy and the country's rich natural resources for its own benefit and that of its patronage networks. Corruption and cronyism is entrenched. Ordinary people, as I mentioned before, are impoverished. People displaced across borders told my office that they wanted to return to economic opportunities at home. They don't want to stay in displacement. They want to return home, and they want to be able to work. They want to be able to realize their future in Myanmar. The way forward will require a radical shift towards an economy that can ensure people's rights are fulfilled with investments in education, health, social protection, and inclusive policies on land and administering natural resources. Private companies, international investors, and other businesses will be desperately needed to help make this vision of the future a reality. So it's not just the question of what government can do, but also private enterprise. Finally, the last pathway that was identified was the need for sustained engagement of the regional and international community as a vital engine to move this reform and democratic process forward. The crisis must remain high on the international political agenda, even though sadly it seems to constantly slip from that agenda. But it is critical that when it is on the agenda and whenever it is discussed, that the views of the people and their aspirations are taken into account. There is a great deal of distrust, and this is something we had to admit. There's a great deal of distrust in the United Nations and in ASEAN, and the extent to which they have fulfilled their own commitments to Myanmar. And we have to reflect on that honestly. How can we win that trust back? What more can we do to help ensure that the needs of the people and their views are taken into account? Coordinated actions, more coordinated actions, I should say, by countries at both a regional and international level are also needed and desired by the people. And that includes to fulfill the obligations made in the General Assembly resolution from 2021 for an arms embargo, coupled with targeted international sanctions consistent with international law, including on jet fuel and dual-use goods to better protect the people of Myanmar. Of course, countries in the region and beyond also need to do more to help protect the people of Myanmar while this crisis remains. And this is something that people repeatedly told us, that they're not asking for a permanent situation or a permanent solution, but they are asking in the short term for more consideration to be given, for economic opportunities, for their right to work in the countries where they're displaced, or for protection regimes and for academic and educational opportunities to be continued. Also, of course, more needs to be done to ensure humanitarian aid is going across international borders. Going forward, it will be critical for the international community to engage with the democracy movement, including the national unity government, ethnic armed groups, and the political mechanisms of those armed groups, including, of course, space being made for the operation of women's groups, youth groups, and civil society in those territories. It is critical to have continued support for civil society at this time. What we also know was a persistent concern was that so much of this resistance and the character and the provision of governance and services, it has been possible because of the support given by donor countries. And yet right now, so much of that donor support is drying up. So it would be remiss not to say, this is a time to increase support, because this resistance and this resilience shown by the people is so extraordinary and so remarkable. But we have to admit that it has been made possible by the funding. It is also critical to reflect that in the areas where the military is no longer in place, there isn't chaos. You know, one of the arguments I think that is consistently made for why engagement with the military is more important than not, it's because of this fear that if the military goes away, there will be chaos. No, there has not been chaos, and that's actually one of the great victories of this resistance movement, of the people of Myanmar and their ability to put in place local community-based governance and service provision. It has been to prevent chaos. So this is where you see the ingenuity and the commitment of the people, and that needs to be honored. So I'm happy to take any questions later, but now I would much rather hear from my fellow panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James, for giving this brief. With that said, I would like to ask the panelists to share their immediate reactions. First up, Thinzar Shunlei. Let's hear from you.
Hello. First of all, I'm humble and pleasure to share the panel with all of our panelists and also being here again. And also today mark 7 July. There is a ongoing commemorative activities happening today for 7 July. It's the 63rd anniversary of the mass killing by the junta, by the dictator Ne Win back in 1962. So, and he bombed the student union building and killed more than 100 students. So today is also a very big day, and I will be sharing my opinions and thoughts, and thinking of all of those fallen heroes and martyrs, comrades, all my friends who are jailed, who were killed, and also who can make it here just because of the security reasons, all of these different hardships. So first of all, thank you to the organizers today, and also to the Human Rights Report for presenting. I think the first, once I finished reading the report, the first sentence that came to my mind is exactly, this is what we are right now. That report has depicted a notion that Myanmar is a nation in the making. So that report has captured who we are right now. It has captured our successes. It has captured who we are right now, our identity, our evolving, challenges, our flaws, everything. It's all about us. So that has clearly a picture as well of the situations in the country. Back in 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever I'm in a public panel or like conferences, everything I got to share is all about violations, genocide, sexual violence, all of these bad news. But since the Spring Revolution, I would say we're no longer alone, like in the revolutions. We are joined by so many people coming from different backgrounds, setters. It has evolved into an uprising, nationwide uprisings. Back in Yangon or Mandalay, in the big city, in the urban areas, things maybe, they keep it cool, and because of the economic situation, etc. But there's so many underground works are happening, led by young generations. They're not waiting for any permission or anything. Like amid all of these challenges, they keep organizing. And the new generations who were only like 14 years old before the coup, and now like they are already 18 years old. And now they will become a new generation of actors, resistant fighter or resistant, activist, human rights defender. So the first thing, reading at the report, I was thinking about one key important thing. So with the given time, I would just jump right into that. That is, how will we make sure what we are doing is what we are hoping for? And what will be the barometer to measure that? I felt it's important to measure ourselves and see ourselves based on how we treat our enemies when we caught them. That could be one key element of ending impunity, ending violence cycle, ending impunity cycle. So there are many prisoners of war in different areas. The number growing. As a resistant fighter, resistant groups claim different areas and territories, so many prisoners of war in place. And we receive as a group, in the politics, we receive so many requests from the ground saying, how are we gonna feed them? How are we gonna do with them? What are the resources available for these prisoners of war? They wanna keep them alive. They are human. That's the first reaction that I received from so many ethnic revolutionary organizations. How will we ensure that we are treating these enemies that we caught according to Geneva Convention, according to humanitarian law? That's the biggest challenge that we are facing right now. In terms of resources, in terms of technical resources, in terms of support system. With these growing numbers, prisoner of wars. And regarding on that, there is also a term that I noticed from what James was saying about EAOs, ethnic M organizations. I think that's like commonly used term, but we are reminded that by these ethnic groups that they like to be called ethnic revolutionary organizations. And that is also clearly right in their terms, because they are no longer just M groups. The ethnic groups, they are revolutionary groups. They have their own political wing. They have their own M wing. They have their own women wing, youth wing. So in that sense, they are the revolutionary groups that has a political vision. Also, they have an M vision for defending their own territories and lands. So ethnic revolution organization, maybe consider using these terms in the next report and so on. And also, last point for me is the sexual violence cases. There is a detailed account of sexual violence from the survivors themselves. I highly recommend for you to read into that carefully, because there is a growing sexual violence cases in Myanmar. According to the WLB report that was released on June 19, International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence Conflict, they have recorded and documented 963 cases happening all around the country. That is like 51% more than last year. The cases are happening, and there are groups on the ground that are actively documenting these cases. Maybe you can work directly with them to add the numbers on your report. Make sure that these numbers are also, added in the report. And sexual violence. We also, as Sister to Sister, we have released a global statement on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence, Sexual Violence and Conflict, with the 63 international organizations calling for the accountability justice, and also survivor center support system. That is a big question. How are we gonna make sure our reports and statements link to the support system? How will we make sure our friends who are listening right now can help and play a role in making sure these reports, these outputs turn into resources, a support system for the women, for the young people in Myanmar? I think that would be the question that we need to explore together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Toby Mendel, what are your immediate reactions to this report?
Oh, thank you. The 3-minute thing is the first time I heard that was just now. And just at lunchtime, we talked about 5 to 10 minutes, so I hope you'll give me a little bit of leeway. First of all, thank you so much to the OHCHR for this report. And what really impressed me about it was the extent of consultations you were able to do, given the context, and given, I didn't realize you'd been excluded from the country since 2019, but anyway. I think I'm going to make a few comments about some of the challenges which I don't think were fully explored in the report. And the first one, the international community and the world has quite a lot of experience with dramatic democratization change. Within this region, we have the Philippines going back rather a long way, and Indonesia, East and Central Europe, South Africa. But there's something fundamentally different about the situation in Myanmar, which is a hugely complicating factor. In the context of Myanmar, we have a very, very brutal, but also very tenacious regime, which is, I personally don't see any political way forward on this. The ways forward, I think, realistically speaking, are economic and military. And by that, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I essentially mean crushing the regime to the point where, it's not going to give up short of nearly being fully crushed. You talked about the collapse of the civil service, and I mean, to get to there, we are going to have to destroy a lot more of what states normally represent. that's a big problem. It's not like those other transitions, rebuilding from getting to there and rebuilding from there. I think we're in new territory. No one else that's successfully transitioned to democracy has been through something like that. That's my first point. I also want to put on the table something which is very controversial, and I don't usually bracket my comments with excuses or references to my history. I've been a human rights activist all of my life. The report is very, very strong on accountability, and as a human rights activist, I absolutely support that. But from a practical point of view, I think we need to start thinking about, not today, but when we actually are getting closer to a real solution, a real possibility of removing this regime, we need to think about what balance we need to achieve between getting there, getting forward, and accountability. It's a challenge. In all of these transitional contexts, that's a challenge. It's going to be a much more pointed and sharp challenge in the context of Myanmar, because your bad guys are worse than, as I just described, in most of the other contexts, the bad guys kind of gave in when they saw the writing on the wall. That is not happening in Myanmar, so that's worse, and the accountability needs are greater. On the other hand, if we see a way forward on this, are we going to, let hard visions of accountability stop that or delay that, rather than, ending the enormous and brutal suffering that you've outlined from going forward? So I think that we need to think about that. Another issue which I think is a huge challenge, and it sort of relates to the first point in Myanmar, is that the current situation arose as a response to a brutal, undemocratic regime. But we have to be very careful not to let the emergence of the post-regime democratic Myanmar be defined by what is happening now. This reaction is the only way for Myanmar to go forward, that is to say, to fight and defeat the regime, but that's not a way to forge a democratic country in the end of the day. And just to give an example, I will refer to the idea of federalism. I'm from Canada. We know a lot about the complicated nature of federalism. We struggle with it almost every day in our country. It is essential that Myanmar have a very, very, deep and democratic process and discussion around the nature of your federalism. The idea of federalism, I think, is pretty much universally accepted. There is this range of options in the space of federalism. And I mean, what you have right now could be described with sort of these mini statelets and then the rump regime-controlled territory could be described as already a quasi-federalist, I mean, apart from the fact that there's no unifying federal entity, but could be defined as an emerging federal arrangement. But that fact should not determine the final nature of your federalism. Rather, as I said, there should be, deep and profound and consultative democratic discussion and debate about what will work for everyone in all of the communities in this extremely complicated country. That's just one example of many, many, many about, that where the emerging de facto situation, which is not what people have chosen because they wanted that. They've chosen it because it's the only way to respond to this regime. So I think that's a huge challenge for the country. The report also talks a lot about the idea of democratic actors and forces and the idea of building democracy from the bottom up. I absolutely support that. That's very, very important. In fact, I think it's the only way, I wouldn't say for any country, but definitely in the context of Myanmar, I think it's the only way for democracy to be achieved. And I think that, civil society groups that we were lauding before, that they represent that. And indeed, in some of my own work, I've been starting to engage with some of the provisional governments to try to help them, move towards more democratic dispensations and to understand democracy and that sort of thing. But I also feel that the report takes a slightly rosy us and them. There's the bad guys. I mean, the military are so bad that it's easy to kind of us and them with them because they're just awful. But it doesn't mean that everybody on the other side is a great, democracy stalwart. And I think it would be naive and unrealistic to assume that. There's a wide range of attitudes and postures vis-a-vis democracy among the provisional governments and the emerging players. And I think that again, is going to be a very big challenge going forward. How to, build democracy in a context which it's not always being welcomed quite as much as I feel the report slightly suggests. And I mean, I would add to that, and the discussion this morning also touched on that, that, I mean, Myanmar, and I hope this doesn't sound too controversial, but Myanmar has never been a strong democracy. Under the NLD government, the military retained control of absolutely key parts of government, a veto over the progress on the constitution and things, and the NLD government itself, and I'm speaking from my own experience engaging in democracy building in Myanmar with the previous government and then that government, of course not with the current government, was not that receptive to a lot of democratic measures. You talked about the importance of media freedom and freedom of expression, freedom of association. Some of these rights were not being embraced even by the democratically elected NLD government. So the base of understanding and experience, let's say, with that in Myanmar is it needs a lot of effort and work, let's say, and that brings me to my last point, and which jives with your last point. The report sets out a very, very ambitious agenda for a future democratic Myanmar. That is an agenda which I absolutely support. I have to say there were a couple of points reading the report where I thought, oh, gee, that would be really nice even to have in my own country, Canada. Not that we're not a strong democracy, but we don't have everything that you guys seem to be asking for here. That's great. That is what you deserve. That is what you need. That's no compromise on that. But democracy doesn't just spring out of the ground. I've spent quite an important part of my life working to build democracy and respect for human rights, and it is everywhere, even in developed democracies, it continues to be, and unfortunately we are seeing that very clearly in the modern world, very unfortunately. It is a constant and a difficult struggle, and building it in a massively complicated situation like Myanmar, even more so. And as James said, these things take resources. Long before the American abdication of its responsibilities in the development space, long even before the coup, we already saw the international community's interest and support and engagement at the financial level, at the basic, dollars sense, declining. Post-coup, those needs are greater than they were before, not less, greater. And yet, and I see some friends from the Myanmar media here, they are painfully aware of this. They're trying to maintain exactly the role that the report talks about, saving lives by informing people, promoting accountability, standing witness to things. The Myanmar media, the resources available to them have just been, down and down and down. And then, on January 24th, I think it was, if I remember correctly, a huge thing that way. So, the world really needs to, apart from all of the political negotiations and the sanctions and all of that stuff, the world needs to stand up and support democracy building in Myanmar. And I understand, I used to work in the Canadian International Development Agency a long time ago. I understand it's difficult for donors to do that. This very long-term, no guarantee of success type of projects, type of work, it's just not sexy. It's not easy to sell to your public. Oh yes, we're funding something which may absolutely never succeed. That's not something that the Canadian government or any other government can easily, sell to its people. It doesn't make good headlines. It doesn't, make nice brochures or whatever. But it's essential work, and the world needs to step up. I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much, Toby. And last but not least, Dr. Mimi Winberg, your reactions.
Aloha, everybody. Mingalaba. My reaction, more for your report rather than the actual report itself. I am really appreciate the fact that it focused on resilience and resistance rather than victimize, because really what Myanmar people had done, resistance has done, is something everybody said cannot be done. When the 2001 happened, everybody said military will win because the people, most of these today resistant fighters they were playing computer games, the video game. Now they had to pick up, and the first time they used was the musket, right? The little hunting ancient musket, and they are right now the military is on the run. They started that way, and 4 years later, military has estimated about 20% of the country, that's all it can control. And there's about 40% of the country is liberated under all these various coalition forces. So they have done something amazing that is, so back to your resilience, right? And everybody said what cannot be done. And that's why, since I'm here, the thing is that story is not being told in the international. I think the Myanmar language media done a really good job in telling the story, but not in English. Since I'm here at FCCT, I want to call out to the international media to cover these amazing stories, these heroes that are ordinary people doing extraordinary work, and the women, how amazing these women are on the ground, the youth and the elderly too, and the amazing cooperation. They cannot get to where they are right now without the level of cooperation, because all they had was a musket, right? So they had to work with each other, and it is creating habits of dialogue, habits of cooperation, habits of understanding of each other, because military had purposefully, systematically divided them. They are the source of division. They're the source of division. That's how they rule the country. So if we can remove this military, they will naturally work together, right? And then also everybody talk about all these people fighting. Yeah, everybody's fighting against one enemy. It's not about when sometimes the international media cover like all these different ethnic groups fighting. It made it sound like ethnic groups are fighting with each other. Actually, they're helping each other, right? And so, for example, I was told like NUG just sent like 2,000 troops up to Kachin State to help defend Kachin, right? So I'm just saying is there's a lot of cooperation going on, and this habits of dialogue, habits of cooperation will carry on to the post-conflict. In a way, it's I would say the silver lining, in disguise, the blessing in disguise, because no one came. No one came to help the people of Myanmar, right? In their resistance and their fight for democracy, they had to do it themselves. And they had to do the hard work of overcoming these misunderstandings, their differences, right? So yes, it is very painful because nobody came. But if somebody has come in and finished the war for them, they may not have that. And so they may have won the war, but they may lose the peace. right? So in a way, I see it as a blessing in disguise that they had to do it themselves. They had to do the hard work of overcoming the differences and misunderstanding to cooperate with each other. So I would call out to the international media, please cover Myanmar conflict and what the Myanmar people are doing. There are a lot of great stories there. They're inspiring stories. It's stories of resilience. So if you need, I know that the world is in, in a lot of problems right now, and you need something that is inspiring. And please cover Myanmar's story, because there are many. There are many. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your immediate reactions. I'd like to then bring this session into the Q&A. For those in the audience who have a question or comment, there's a microphone at the back right there on the stilts. Please line up and prepare your questions for the next 30 minutes before 7 o'clock. Before we do that though, as people line up and think about their questions, I will ask each of the panelists one question. So I'll start off with Thinzar Shinlei. You're one of the contributors of this report and can speak well as a representative of the resistance. With that said, what are your views on how the report specifically does on two topics: the SAC's proposed elections and women?
Thank you. Regarding the election, I think that's going to be a big hit in the coming months. It's scheduled to happen at the end of this year, and the implementation is going on. And also we are seeing the increased engagement from different governments, including our neighboring country. Also, as from the resistance side, I'm also speaking on behalf of the Strategy Initiative Forum, which is a coalition that has 16 members of as a member from different areas, from the northern part to the southern part, including KNU, KNPP. And it was founded by one of the group called Blue LV and General Strike Committee. So all of these different groups formed together, and they formed themselves as an anti-sham election campaign committee, where they mobilize people to also amplify their voices from the ground. And anti-sham election is not just about going against the election. And we picked this title because it's really important. The resistance itself has abolished the 2008 constitution that was drafted by military. But then 2008 still remain one of the constitutions for a lot of partner, even in the people in the public. People might not know why we abolished 2008 constitution. What do we have as an alternative, and what ground that we are opposing the election? So with that note, we have started drafting a position paper on the elections, on the sham election of the military junta, and we started drafting since 2022, and we published in public in 2024 in February, in 2025 in February this year. So this is a copy of these position paper that I also put out on the table, and you can get a copy for each. And in this position paper, we have consulted with so many different ethnic or also resistant groups from different areas. Around 25 organizations were consulted to draft this paper. In that paper, there are three key positions. The first is the junta election, we oppose them from the political point of view. The second position is we oppose the junta sham election from the legality point of view. And third is we oppose the junta sham election from the justice point of view. So these three key positions, you can see the elaboration of all of these positions, why we are saying what we are saying. So it's not just about they are one of their events happening. So the election is one of the stage planned. We see there is a constant shifting of their constant shuffle of their cabinet all the time. Almost every month there is a constant shuffle of their cabinet. But this will be one of those, but under the name of election that will effectively fool people. So I want to go detail on this, but with the given time, I will just stop here, and then I want you to read this paper for all of us. Yeah, thanks. And also for the women, I think I already said enough on the women's issue. On that note, the sexual violence is happening, and women on the front, I think we are undergoing a two revolution at the same time, not just the junta dictatorship, but also patriarchy in place in every way. And sometimes we find ourselves in a position with enemies closer to us, with the patriarchy mindset, with the impunity. So we are making sure that's the only thing we can say, women's group, making sure there is no impunity, even in the revolution. We say no exception, no excuses for any sort of sexual violence, sexual abuse, or sexual exploitation in the revolution and beyond. So that's our commitment, our pledge to the people of Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you. For Toby, while the report notes the dire situation of the media sector in the country and the crucial need for media in things like reporting human rights violation, it may need your advice in terms of providing recommendations around the sector. What would be your recommendations when it comes to media and media freedoms in Myanmar?
Thanks. First, I just want to pick up because I've made a lot of challenging comments, but I mean, I think that, you know, there is a silver lining, and I agree very much with both of these points. I mean, you know, what I saw, for example, pretty much immediately after the coup was a big change in attitudes about the Rohingya and about, you know, ethnic issues. I do think, you know, Myanmar is a remarkably patriarchal society, or has been a remarkably patriarchal society, and I do see a positive opportunity to break that down with these things. So, you know, this, I mean, fighting does forge some things. The report doesn't get into the level of detail that you hinted that may need my support or whatever. We've been providing that support before, and we will certainly continue to provide it. Well, we are continuing to provide it, including to the provisional governments and any post-military dispensation. But I don't think the report was the place to get into that. I think that the report basically highlights the main themes of the military, and James in his introductory comments also referred to those, and I think it's solid in that respect. I would just make one, and I hope this is not a nitpicking point, but for me it's a little bit of a bugbear. It talks about a bunch of different types of media actors, including social media professionals, and I have to react against that. I guess you're not talking about TikTokers who manage to make a living, or YouTubers who run comedy routines or whatever, but that is who the main social media professionals actually are. There are a lot of them around the world, and they're all power to them. You know, they're using their voices and their expressions to make money, which is great. But I think it's very important for the UN and for all of us to maintain a very clear distinction between media and social media. And I mean, obviously, media are on social media, just as my NGO is on social media, and every government and every business, everybody's on social media. But so that doesn't mean that the media that are only on social media aren't media, but social media is not media, and there's a function and a professionalism, and it's not easy in the modern world to define what media is, but increasingly we're seeing people trending towards using the idea of commitment to some professional values as the core definition of what distinguishes media from other social expressors who may have a lot of influence, may have hundreds of thousands of followers, but don't have any commitment to professionalism, like for accuracy or respect for privacy or other professional standards. And so that's increasingly, the role that the way that those are being distinguished, and I don't like to see these sort of loose references to social media. I will just make one other point. I mean, you talked about the role of the media in addressing the hate and discrimination and bias that the regime and many others are promulgating. There, of course, I do see a very, very important role for social media as social media companies, and the social media companies in Myanmar have had a very checkered past on that, and I won't get into the details of that play, but that's something that, I mean, media alone cannot counter that, because a lot of people don't consume media, and they're just in their little social media bubbles. So if we want to break down discrimination and hatred and misogyny and whatever, we need the social media companies to engage properly on those issues.
Thank you very much, Toby Mendel. And before I open the floor to the audience, the microphone is right there. Feel free to line up after I ask this final question, and I'll be taking questions first come, first serve. So Dr. Mimi Winberg, the report addresses civil-military relations directly. It recommends the implementation of civilian oversight of the military, security sector reform, and the demanding and pressuring of the military to stop violence. How realistic are these recommendations, and which actors are best for taking on these goals, and what would you suggest?
Okay. Well, before I answer that question, I wanted to go back to the election, right? The election these forced fake elections that is not, it's not respecting the demands of and democratic aspiration of people. And you have done the, interview, and it also jives with our, daily working with the various people inside. In this election, they don't think this is a real election. It's just a forced fake elections, right? So, that's all I gotta say on this election. And anybody that trying to sell it as a something, real is, there will be special place in hell for them, right? I guess. And then as for the media coverage, the movement is made, nearly 40% of movement is made up of women, and their stories are not being covered enough. But that is not only that, but that is also go into breaking that patriarchal mindset. We need to let the society know that women were side by side with men in winning this freedom, this democracy. But if you look at the, if you go to the, media and look at count how many stories of men versus women, you will see very small on the women. So that's kind of present their contribution to the fight. So when the time comes, where were you, right? It's the men that won the fight. But in fact, almost half of this fight is participated by women. So more media coverage of women, what women are doing, really helps the post-conflict. And then in post-conflict, when women get a seat at the table, right, we will win peace, right? We know from study after study, when women are involved in the peace process, then, so in order for us to win peace after winning the war, we need women at the table. And that is, right now, we need to tell the story of women contributing to this fight. So that's what I would say. So, and then now going into the security sector reform, and women made up half the population, right? They should be a part of it. They should be a part of it. So in this security sector reform, I would like to see women at the table. Women at the table. For this realistic, the military really has transformed. The Myanmar military is no longer a professional military. It's a criminal gang. A militant criminal gang that is trafficking. They are a source of transnational crime. They facilitate that. Right? And they're also, people talk about warlordism if the military, they are the warlords. They act like warlords. If you go to the local area, what they have been doing all these years is they act like warlords, right? So, I think that sometimes people don't frame it that way because they have the national military. They assume that they are acting like professional military. And what they're doing is more like a criminal gangs. So, when we do the security sector reforms, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do.
The judiciary is going to be easy compared to that.
Also, when you do security sector reform, people always think about civil military. Oh, yes, that is important. But also threat. When you establish a military, it's to address a threat. Where is the external threat coming from? And then you establish military based on that threat, right? And so for external threat is more likely in Myanmar has been maritime. Like 80% of Myanmar fish gone, right? Because they couldn't protect it. So maybe in the new security, sector, new military will be not so much land-based. It will be more sea-based, maritime-based. right? Because that's where your external, the threat is going to be. So yes, and then once you decide that, then you can talk about civil-military relation. But you just don't have military just for the sake of military, but you gotta match the threat with the military force that you have, right? Those are some of the things to consider. But I don't approach civil-military relation from the scholarly basis. I approach it from a practitioner, because I'm a practitioner. I'm a retired U.S. Army officer, so that's how I see it that way. But we have a lot of work to do once we win war, and then we have to build peace. And that process, women are really important to be at the table.
Thank you very much. James, I want to give you the chance to respond to anything that you heard so far, if you would like.
Sure. No, I think that first of all, I thank all of the panelists for the comments on the report, and both the praise and the criticism. I take it all in stride. Reports, particularly UN reports, are always a difficult process to navigate because of the different restrictions you're under, both in terms of terminology and language, but also in terms of word counts and length. For this particular report, we were under a strict word limit of 7,650 words, and as a result, whole sections that came out of the consultations had to be cut. We did have, for example, an entire section devoted to the consultations that we had conducted with the armed groups and with the Myanmar military, because we did send questionnaires, written questionnaires, to the military actors. But whenever we were then against this word limit, we were told to cut further, and so we had to reduce some of these inputs. And so the cuts we made, we decided that this is about the aspirations of the Myanmar people, therefore necessarily the civilians. We thought that the military, the armed groups, they get enough of a voice. And so we want to reflect what it is the civilians, and the civilians particularly, that are constituting these attempts at governance and trying to realize the democratic aspirations of their communities. We want to know what they are saying, because so little, I guess you'd say, airtime has been given to addressing what they want and what their aspirations are. I do understand that means the report is limited, and then wherever possible, the other thing I would say is that yes, at times the findings in the report are very rosy in how they present what the people want, because we are reflecting what the people told us. We didn't go in and try to introduce the voice of cynicism into some of their aspirations. We didn't want to be a check on that. We wanted to instead really reflect what people are fighting for and what they want to see, to give more meaning to what they're acting for. After all, we wanted to be optimists too. I mean, they say the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is a pessimist is simply an optimist with experience. So we just wanted to make sure.
I used to be an optimist.
So we just wanted to reflect that in the report, and so to that extent, we felt that we at least gave that the clear resonance that it deserved. And then finally, I'd just say that on the elections process, I think that what we are most concerned about, especially whenever we see what people told us, that many people in the communities, what they sort of reflected that they were most concerned about is that if elections do go forward and they are given broad acceptance, that is essentially letting the military off the hook. If there's this pressure to have any sort of jumpstart or a benchmark to allow a transition process or our political process to go forward, without the military ever making any sort of concession to meeting either the 5-point consensus or to meeting the terms of Security Council Resolution 2669, then you're essentially saying that they've never had to compromise at any point in this process and focus on really what all of both the Security Council and the ASEAN consensus called for, which was de-escalation. Focus on turning down the violence, ending the violence, and focus on humanitarian access to meeting the needs of the people who have suffered most. And right now, the exact opposite is happening because that is the military strategy. And so you can't allow a process to go forward, or at least you shouldn't allow a process to go forward, because that is no basis for a political transition if one side has never had to give anything to that process. So, thank you. That's all I'll say for now.
Thank you very much, James. So if there are any questions, please line up at the mic. I think we have a question.
Yes, Steve Parker. Thank you very much, and I agree with everything that everybody said. Very insightful. Pragmatically, the elephant in the room is China. So without China's intervention, the October 23 movement would have gone much faster. Everything would have gone faster. How does the UN or anybody else deal with China blocking all of this intense personal commitment amongst the Burmese to move forward?
I'll open the floor to anyone who would like to answer first.
Well, I mean, China can help a lot. It will slow down, but the people of Myanmar are not stopping. They're moving out. In fact, I think China is making a mistake in picking the wrong horse, losing horse. Yeah, because it has created a lot of. They're going to get a lot of big backlash. You know, they had some level of disdain against China before. China as in not Chinese people. They're talking about PRC, right? They're the Communist Party of China. They always have distrust of them, and it's even more. So it will make it difficult for them, the China-Myanmar relationship going forward, because a lot of people will have this deep resentment toward China for what it has done to the country. So, you know, I think that China read it wrong, or I don't know. I'm not a sinologist, so I shouldn't say that, but yeah, I think it's picking the wrong horse.
Well, just add, I mean, obviously, you know, China is a huge power in the world, more so in Myanmar, where it has been interfering for a long time. I won't put an exact number on that. You know, the inability of the Security Council to move forward on some, you know, what would be some very important measures vis-a-vis Myanmar, in particular a global arms embargo, which could be enforced by the Security Council under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, the peace and security measure, you know, not going forward. There could be a reference to the International Criminal Court, again, you know, not happening in the Security Council. Those are sort of the high-level diplomatic things, but then sort of on-the-ground actions by China are very problematical. I do agree with you that in the long run, China will be on the wrong side of things. And what I might hope is that, you know, because the Chinese are very planned and careful in the way that they operate, they don't sort of blunder around. I would hope that they will see that you know, sooner than later, and modify their position. And I think we've seen a little bit of that, but not enough, for sure.
Opening the floor to more in-person questions. I do have some questions from online. So to whoever who would like to answer. This person asks, how should transitional justice be approached in post-junta Myanmar to ensure accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that there's a historically speaking, in transitional context, there's a lot of models for that. And, in South Africa, for example, which was one of the early leaders in that area, or early experiments, perhaps, and not everybody supports the South African approach. There was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, whereby you testified truthfully and you got impunity in exchange for that. So that was essentially the South African model. And in the South African, the South Africans strongly supported that. I think, not all of them, obviously, but there was broad support across different communities in South Africa for that. I think arguably it allowed South Africa to move forward from its past. I think the situation, as I said before, in Myanmar is a lot more difficult because, the South African regime was a disgusting racist regime, but I don't think it has risen to the level of brutality and abuse that the Myanmar regime has. And in the end, the South African regime, without destroying the country, without anywhere near destroying the country as much as already Myanmar has been destroyed and is in the process of being destroyed, and the numbers of people killed and imprisoned, and without any form of justice whatsoever and whatever. So that all argues for a high degree of accountability. I absolutely agree with you that no process forward can happen without by sort of brushing these things under the carpet and pretending that the military didn't do anything wrong. Nothing I say should, and obviously the end result must be full democracy and the absolute removal of the military from any role in civilian, economic, or political life, and restricting them to, as you said, dealing with external threats or potentially significant internal threats, but not in the way that they've described that until now. But I don't have a, the Myanmar situation is very unique, and I don't, it's not an area that I've researched heavily, in particular vis-a-vis Myanmar. I think new models will probably need to be forged, and some kind of, and it depends as well how things go. Like, we don't know what the end, we're not, well, hopefully we are close, but I don't think we're that close to the end game, and how to get there, because the overriding need is to stop this business, to get those guys out, and if compromises need to be made to do that, certain compromises, I believe, would be appropriate, but not any compromise. So I don't have a prescription for that. I think it's a very, very complicated issue that will need to be thought about a lot. But I think taking just a strict accountability position is not sophisticated enough.
Then Zara, you wanted to respond?
Regarding transition justice, thank you for asking the important questions. We want justice now, not just in the transition. That's the reaction that you will see from different people. But definitely TJ is a part of the big discussions in the revolutions. I'm also a member of Transitional Justice Committee at the National Unity Consultative Council, where we drafted a framework. TJ framework was published last year in December. You can also look into that, like what we have discussed so far. It's sometimes talking about transition is like you have to imagine what could become, and that kind of give, along this whole process, we have achieved so much along the way as well, that we never ever were in that position to think of our future in that free sense. We were always watched by Honda all the time. Military guys are always there watching, monitoring what we're going to say. But this is the first time since 2021 that we got to talk about our own issues without them bossing around, guarding around, So, different issues, and we were having a 2 years round of experiences in the discussing all these policy. Now we're drafting around 9 policy, different joint sub-policy based on that framework. And definitely is no exception, no excuses. Also, there is a big question when we're gonna start the transition justice. If we are in the transition position, for example, are we starting the TJ process from 2021 or 1988 or 1962? Imagine 1962, that 7 July massacre, these students didn't get justice. Their family members stay like waiting for the justice. So we have to talk about these processes in terms of timeline, in terms of resources. Do we have enough judges? Do we have enough lawyers to process all of this? Is a big question. Yeah, I think it's inspiring to discuss on the transitional justice.
Did you want to respond, James? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I did. Because I think that, I mean, to me, the most important thing is that if you're going to approach transitional justice, you have to do it comprehensively. I think one of the mistakes made during the democratic transition, at least, was that transitional justice was sort of slow marched or postponed, and that the elements of it were being imagined or planned, but nothing comprehensive had really begun or had really taken root the way it was needed. And you have to think that transitional justice is a full package. There are 4 sort of core pillars to it. You have the criminal justice view of accountability, but there are other types of accountability in there. The notion of restorative justice, the things like vetting, ensuring that whenever you have a government, it is formed by people that have agreed to act under certain ethical considerations, who have their pasts fully vetted before they're allowed to take on these critical public roles. That there is an education element, there is an element of truth-telling, and of course a process of writing the history of the abuses and the violations, making sure that people actually learn and have access to what happened in their communities and societies. And then the last thing is, of course, the whole battery of reforms, everything from reparations to issues of property reform, institutional reforms, of course, critical things like security sector reforms, reforming the citizenship laws, the property laws, the whole battery of different legal systems that will need to reflect the modern society. And then, of course, I think also critical to all of this is that you have to, of course, involve people like Finzar. That you'll have to involve the women of the country, the youth, civil society groups, the groups that frankly too often are left out of these discussions whenever you get to a political transition, because they're not seen as bases of political power. But I think we can see in this particular context, there's enormous power in these groups because they have been the backbone of the resistance. And so, again, it's very hard, it will be hard, but that's why the elements of this transitional justice process will have to be seen throughout the transition process. Thank you.
I just want to quickly respond to Toby a little bit. You said, we hope we can get to the end, soon, right? Well, we can get to the end sooner if the international community stop, some of the international community stop, supporting this forced fake election and forced fake dialogues, and then we can get to it. And back to what you were saying, these guys that are going to contest an election, they are the violators. They admitted. We have many, unlike the previous, uprising, we have, they admit, Zominto admitted that, children are a viable targets for them, right? So at this time around, because of the social media, all the prevalence of videos and a phone, we have a lot of evidence, and these guys that are about to contest, in this fake election, are the perpetrator of these violations, right? So if some of the international community stop, supporting the election and making it, trying to pull wool over people's eyes, we'll get there faster.
And that brings us to the end of the conference. Thank you to everyone and the panels who have joined. If you have further questions, I believe the panelists are still in the room as we are eating dinner and enjoying the rest of our night. So if you want to access the United Nations reports, I believe you can access that on the website, and you can find information about all of our panelists here today. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. Very interesting.